I talk in my book about Just Mary of my parents' mixed political backgrounds. Not many people know that, except when I put it in my book. My father was from Kilfenora in County Clare, where his father was of the a great follower of the old Irish party, and in time a follower of Michael Collins. And my father, as a young boy, imbued that from him, and indeed my cousin is here today, Dr. Dudley Edwards, through my father's mother, late lamented and early lamented, but he was imbued with that kind of politics. He went off to UCG, University College in Galway, where he met my mother, and she was Annie Scandon from Drumcliff, County Sligo. Now and she was of a strongly Republican background. Indeed, my grandmother, her mother, was left with a clutch of 6 children when her husband was brought home to her mortally wounded on the door of a pub at a local skirmish in Sligo, and he died 3 or 4 days later, and she was left, and this was the era of no great big social welfare or anything like that. She was left with a clutch of children to bring up and to educate, and they had 12 acres of land, not great land, at the foot of Bunban. Now, she was very lucky. She had a cousin who was very central in the nuns community, the Ursine in Sligo, and she took each one of the girls one by one and educated them, brought them into school, clothed them, fed them, made them boarders, and they got powerful education, so much so that 3 of them got scholarships directly to university out of the Ursine in Sligo. So I went back there some time ago to look at the records, and I was amazed. They have a wonderful woman there who's looking after all of that, an elderly nun, but she had them beautifully collated and ready for me. And I thought to myself, a young girl from a background like that, as my mother was, it was a great feat to get to college and to do her BA and all of that. But along the way anyway, she met my father, Patrick Joseph Lenihan, from Kilfenora in County Clare. And when they met, their varying political backgrounds went out the window because love came in. And once they did, that was that. They fell for one another very heavily, and they decided that they would get married. And going back to my grandmother, she was so Republican, instead of minding her business when she was left with all those children and knowing that she should be good and careful, she made her house a safe house. I heard one of the earlier speakers talk about the term a safe house. Well, she made a safe house of her little farmhouse, and everyone who was on the run or was in trouble or whatever was welcome there. I've often thought of her spirit. Instead of, as I say, saying to herself, how am I going to manage now with all of these children? I have no money and I have to manage and do. She went out and she got busy. And in fact, one of her sons, Roger Scandal, he was the boy soldier on the mountain in the skirmish when there were 6 of them killed, including Michael McDougall's uncle, Owen McNeil's son, Brian McNeil. He was the one who alerted them on the mountain that they were coming for them. The bodies were brought down, and my grandmother had a small dairy in her house, and the bodies were laid out there, the 6 bodies, as they are called now, Sligo's Noble 6. So that was the background of my mother, and as I say, the background of my father. My father fought in the Free State Army. He fought in, and I went and seen his army number. He fought in Athenry when he was a student, and then after that he fought in many other skirmishes of that war. We were always conscious growing up, my 2 brothers and my sister, we were always conscious of our mixed political background. But when my father first went, Sean Lass, who was the minister in the Fianna Fáil government, had met my father as a young civil servant, and he liked the cut of his jib, he thought, well, he's a good guy, and he sent him to Athlone to set up an enterprise called General Textiles Limited. It was an embryonic cotton factory. There were about 5 or 6 of them set up around Ireland at the time to give employment. State invested, of course, but it was the time for that. And he sent him to Athlone, and he came home and said to my mother one day, "Pack your traps, Annie, we're going to Athlone." Now, she was glad. It was halfway to Sligo. He was halfway to Clare, I suppose. But anyway, they came to Athlone with 3 children, and my mother was pregnant with me. So I'm the only Athlone person out of that clutch of people. But when the local elections came in 1943 in Athlone town, my father went as a Ratepayers Association candidate. It was another title for Fine Gael, so he was still with his roots, and he went on that occasion as a Ratepayers Association. But later on, and he headed the poll. Now later on, he I suppose Sean the Mask got at him and sort of said, "Hey, I just sent you to Athlone to be running for Fine Gael," but he went for Fianna Fáil, and in time he became Mr. Fianna Fáil Athlone. And in 1965 he went for the Dáil and got in, and for 5 short years he died in 1970.